Hello, my little mathematicians. Today, we are going to review how to go back and forth between a fraction, a percent, and a decimal, no matter how it was first given to you. So for the first one, it says 1/4. How do I change 1/4 to a percent? Well, one option is anything over 100 is a percent. So if I can get this denominator to become 100, then I'll know what 1/4 is as a percent. So 4 times what is 100? 25. So if I do the same thing to the numerator, 1 times 25, I get 25. So 25 hundredths, or 25 over 100, is 25%, because any number that's over 100, that's what a percent is. Once I have it as a percent, I can very easily change it to a decimal. If I remember this nifty little trick called dip. Okay, D stands for decimal, P stands for percent. And that I in the middle is just a reminder that you always move it 1, 2 to either the right or 1, 2 to the left. How you decide what to do, let's use this one as an example. Well, right now I have 25%, and I want to know what is that as a decimal. So I'm starting as a percent, and I want to move towards becoming a decimal. So which way did I move? 2 to the left. So as of right now, when there's no decimal present, it's behind the number, right? So I'm going to go 1, 2 to the left. So that means that 25% is the same thing as 0.25. Now, if some of you are like, wait, why is the decimal when there's none present behind the number instead of in front of the number? Well, think of it this way. If I were to say $5 and I was too lazy and I just wrote it quickly, I write it like this. There's no decimal present, right? But it's implied that it's behind the number, and that's $5, right? So when you write 25%, if there's no decimal present, when there's no decimal present, it's behind the number, not in front of the number, but behind the number. And then you know where it is and which way you should move it. Since this one was a percent and I wanted to move towards a decimal, I moved it 2 to the left. So 1, 2 to the left from its starting place puts it in front, which means 0.25 is the same as 25%. Now, this is nice if they give it to you as a percent that you can change it to a decimal. But if you are just starting from a fraction, well, you can always take the top and divide it by the bottom to get a decimal as well. 4 can't go into 1, so I add a decimal and a 0. 4 goes into 10 twice, and 2 times 4 is 8. When I subtract that, I get 2. Bring down my 0. 4 goes into 20 5 times. So again, 0.25 is the same thing as 1/4. I just did it from a fraction to a decimal. This way is if I was already given the percent, then I could go from a percent to a decimal. Let's move on to the next one. This one says 1/8. How do I get 1/8 to become a percent? Well, I can't multiply 8 times anything to get it, but I could use what's called cross products, right? If I want to know what this is, I can use what's called cross products. This is a cross from x. So 8 times x, because they're across from each other, set that equal to 1 times 100. And then solve for x. Well, 1 times 100 is 100. And then bring down your 8x. Now this is saying 8 times what is 100, essentially like what we're doing there. So to figure that out, I would divide both sides by 8, because 8 divided by 8 is 1. So now I have 1x, or x is by itself. And whatever you do to one side, do to the other. So type in 100 divided by 8, and you get 12.5. So x, this number up here above 100, would be 12.5%. Now that I have it as a percent, I can again follow my dip procedure right here. From a percent to a decimal, move it 1, 2 to the left. Okay, so 12.5. Here's my initial decimal. I'm going to move it 1, 2 to the left. 12.5% is 0.125 as a decimal. Or again, I could always just take the top, divide it by the bottom. 8 can't go into 1, so I add a decimal and a 0. 8 goes into 10 twice. When you subtract that, you get 2. Bring down a 0. 8 goes into 20 2 times. 8 times 2 is 16. And when you subtract that, you get 4. Bring down to 0. 8 goes into 40 5 times. So you get 0.125 because 8 goes into 10 once, and then you get a remainder of 2. Bring down your 0. 8 goes into 20 twice because 8 times 2 is 16. Subtract that, you get 4. 8 goes into 40 5 times, and you get a remainder of 0. So 0.125 is the same thing as 1/8. Okay? Or again, if you have it as once you have it as a percent, you can use dip. Okay, for this one, you're like, they didn't give me any information, did they? Actually, they did. They told me right here that the fraction started as 2/5. So then I could very easily change this to a percent because 5 times what is 100? Well, 5 times 20 is 100. And so then do the same thing on top. 2 times 20 is 40. So 40 over 100 is 40%. And then again, if I follow my dip, I'm starting at 40%, right? So if I'm going from a percent to a decimal, I move 2 to the left. So move it 1, 2 places to the left, and I get 0.40 or 0.4. 0.40 is the same thing as 0.4. Of course, you can always do top divided by bottom when you were given it as a fraction. And 5 goes into 2 0 times, so add a decimal and a 0. 5 can go into 20 4 times. You get a remainder of 0, so you get 0.4. Either way you want to do it is fine. So sometimes if you want, you can go from a fraction to a decimal. And if you're allowed to use a calculator, you would just type in top divided by bottom, so 2 divided by 5, and you would get 0.4. And then once you have your decimal of 0.4, decimal to a percent, well, that would be 1, 2 to the right. That would be 40%. Same thing here. What if I did it by the dividing way and I did getting a decimal first instead of getting a percent first? So if I did top divided by bottom, I typed into my calculator 1 divided by 8, and I got 0.125. Well, I'm starting as a decimal and I want to know what it is as a percent. So move it 1, 2 to the right. It goes between that 2 and the 5. And hey, look at that. That's what we got when we did it this way. We got 12.5%. Same thing for this one. When I did fraction to decimal, I got 0.25 for my decimal. If I want to go from a decimal to a percent, I move 1, 2 to the right. So 1, 2 to the right puts me at 25%. So you don't necessarily have to go in order. You can kind of pick and choose. Do I want to go from here to a percent and then from a percent to a decimal? Or can I go from here to a decimal and then from that decimal go back to a percent? It's just a matter of preference. No matter what, you still get the same answer. So let's take a look at this one. It says 0.5 or 0.50. Those are saying the same thing. However, this is not saying the same thing. 0.05 is not, because think about it. This is 50 cents. This is 5 cents. If somebody owed you 50 cents and they brought you 5 cents, would you be happy? No. Okay, so the number in the tens place needs to be the same. These are equal. That is not. So I can choose to drop off at a 0 at an end, but if a 0 is between the decimal and a number, that's a very important placement holder, and you can't drop that 0 off. This is not equivalent to these two. All right, now that I've established, I've kind of killed it, we have 0.5 or 0.50, however you want to think about it. That's the decimal, and I want to go from a decimal to a percent. Well, if I'm going from a decimal starting place towards becoming a percent, I move 2 to the right. So move it 1, 2 to the right. And look at that. You add a 0 placement holder, and it's 50%. Right? So 50 over 100 is the same thing as 50%. Correct? So I can use that to then figure out what it is as a fraction. Can I reduce this? Yes, I can if I divide by 50. 50 divided by 50 is 1. 100 divided by 50 is 2. So 50% is 1/2. Well, that makes sense. If you get half of 100%, you get 50%, and percent is always out of 100. Okay. I also could have gone from a decimal to figure out what the fraction would be, because 0.5 is 5/10. If I were to have reduced that, I would have gotten 1/2. And even if you started as 0.50, well, two numbers after the decimal, so 50 over 100, and you still reduce to 1/2. See how it doesn't matter how they give it to you in the first place? You can still figure out the other missing piece. Last one. 0.75. Doesn't really matter which one you want to do first. I think it's easier to do this one first. So let's see. I have 0.75. That's the decimal. I want to move towards a percent, right? So 0.75. If I move 2 to the right, that equals 75%. Okay, so I could do from a decimal to a percent following dip. And then I also know that 0.75 is the 5 is in the hundreds place. So I can go 75 over 100. And then you'd be, oh, hey, any number over 100 is a percent. So you could have gone from there to a percent as well. Again, since we established that this is in the hundreds place, I start with 75 over 100 when it's written as a fraction, and then you try to think what you can reduce it by. Well, quarters can make 75 cents and $1. So I'm going to divide by 25. 75 divided by 25 is 3. 100 divided by 25 is 4. So 3/4 is the same thing as 75% or 0.75. 1/2 is the same as 50% or 0.5. 2/5 is the same as 40% or 0.4. 1/8 is the same as 12.5% or 0.125. And finally, 1/4 is the same as 25% or 0.25. You are now an expert at going back and forth between all the different forms of fraction, percent, and decimal, no matter how it was given to you. Congratulations.